What if everything you thought you knew about one of the greatest entertainers who ever lived was only half the story? We're talking about Michael Jackson, a man whose music sold hundreds of millions of records. A man who literally changed the way the world experienced pop culture. But here's the thing. After he died, after the cameras went away, and the news cycle moved on, the people who actually knew him, who stood beside him, who protected his kids and answered his phone calls at 2 in the morning, those people kept talking. And what they've been saying paints a picture that's a whole lot more complicated than what most of us were ever shown. So today, we're pulling it all together. The bodyguards, the music producers, the friends who watched it happen in real time. This is the story of Michael Jackson's final years, told by the people who lived it alongside him. Let's start with something that doesn't get talked about enough: the stress. Bill, one of Michael's personal bodyguards, described it in a way that stopped me cold the first time I heard it. He said, "Imagine the kind of pressure a person would have to be under to need anesthesia just to fall asleep. Not sleeping pills, not a warm cup of tea and some meditation. Full-on surgical-grade anesthesia, every single night." That's where Michael was. And Bill didn't just observe this from a distance. He was there. He was one of the people responsible for keeping Michael safe, for shielding his children from the chaos swirling around them constantly. Death threats dropped off at hotel front desks. Middle-of-the-night evacuations where the kids didn't even know why they were packing up and leaving. Just gone. Quietly. In the dark. That was Michael Jackson's life. Now, Bill recalled a specific conversation that he didn't fully understand at the time, but that came back to him like a freight train once events started unfolding. When the This Is It tour was announced, 50 concerts in London, the biggest comeback in music history, Michael pulled Bill aside and said something simple. He said, "Bill, now you're going to see the vultures coming." Bill said he didn't really get it in the moment. But almost immediately after that announcement, everything shifted. People who hadn't called in years started calling. Everyone wanted a seat at the table. Everyone wanted to be involved in what was shaping up to be one of the most financially massive tours ever attempted. Bill started receiving calls from people trying to reach Michael. People who, frankly, hadn't been around when things were hard. That's when those words clicked. The vultures had arrived. But to understand the pressure Michael was under in those final years, you have to go back a bit. Back to an album called Invincible. Matt, another former bodyguard, shared something deeply personal about this period. He described witnessing Michael at one of his lowest emotional points. Not on stage, not in public, but behind closed doors, in hotel rooms, on phone calls, sometimes locked in his bathroom, sobbing. Invincible was released and sold around 5 million copies. Now, for virtually any other artist on the planet, 5 million copies is an extraordinary achievement. You're celebrating, you're touring, you're grateful. But Michael Jackson wasn't any other artist. He was the man behind Thriller, which crossed 100 million copies sold. So 5 million felt, to him, like failure. And here's the thing. Michael didn't think it was an accident. Matt described sitting with Michael during this period, listening to him explain his theory. He believed Sony Music, the label behind Invincible, had deliberately underpromoted the album. And the reason, according to Michael, wasn't artistic disagreement or budget concerns. It was financial strategy. Here's where it gets intense. Michael had borrowed a significant sum, reportedly around $200 million, to fund the album and his broader ambitions. And what did he put up as collateral? His music catalog. The asset that had made him one of the most powerful people in the music industry. A catalog that included some of the most valuable songs ever recorded. The Beatles, Eminem, and a whole lot more. The theory, shared by people around him, went like this. If Invincible failed, the catalog would transfer to Sony as repayment. And a catalog of that value, potentially worth well over $1 billion, would be one of the greatest financial acquisitions in industry history. So the incentive to let the album fail? Was enormous. Michael believed it. Deeply. And Matt watched him scream about it on the phone, cry about it behind closed doors, and wrestle with the idea that 5 years of his life had been used against him. Now let's talk about that catalog for a second, because it's central to everything. Michael purchased the ATV music catalog back in the mid-1980s, a move that gave him ownership of hundreds of Beatles songs, among many others. He bought it for around $47 million. That same catalog would eventually be worth $500 million, maybe more, by the time of his death. Bill put it plainly, owning that catalog made Michael incredibly powerful. It also, according to those around him, ended certain friendships and created enemies in places that mattered. Matt mentioned, carefully, without naming names, that there was a major music superstar who never forgave Michael for buying that catalog. Someone who had reportedly been given the opportunity to purchase it themselves, but wasn't willing to pay the price. This person, Matt said, would sometimes get on the phone with Michael and be openly abusive, and Michael would come out of those calls shaken, hurt, sometimes crying. He was the most powerful man in the music industry, and yet he was deeply, privately wounded by the personal cost of that power. Music producer Teddy Riley, who collaborated closely with Michael on multiple projects, was asked point-blank who he thought was responsible for Michael's death. He paused, pulled back, said he'd learned his lesson about speaking too freely on topics that could have consequences. It wasn't evasion so much as caution, the kind of caution that comes from having said something once and being made to walk it back publicly. That pause said something, though. It said that even people who were close enough to make music with Michael, who sat in the studio with him, who understood his creative process from the inside, even they aren't fully comfortable talking about what they believe happened. Music legend Smokey Robinson took a different approach. He reflected on what it meant to learn that Michael had been given propofol, an anesthetic, every night just to sleep. Smokey recalled his own experience going under general anesthesia for a surgery, and how the nurse casually mentioned that it was the same substance that killed Michael. He remembered lying there like a corpse for 6 hours, completely unresponsive to the world, and he thought, that's what this man was doing to himself every night just to get some rest. Insane was the word Smokey used, and the sadness in how he described it was real. This wasn't distant commentary from someone who barely knew Michael. This was grief. This was a friend trying to make sense of something that still doesn't fully make sense. Matt also shared one of the most haunting details in this entire conversation. The Tuesday night before Michael died, he called Matt and was, in Matt's words, completely erratic. Scattered. Not himself. Matt asked him directly, "Have you taken something?" Michael said, "Don't worry, the doctor gave me something." He was about to go and rehearse. Then the conversation took an unexpected turn. Michael asked if Matt knew where his father, Joseph Jackson, was. Now, anyone who knows the history of that family understands how significant that is. The relationship between Michael and Joseph was famously complicated, strained over decades of very public tension. For Michael to be reaching out looking for his father, on a night when he was clearly not well, that meant something. Matt gave him Joseph's number. Michael also asked for other contacts, people he apparently didn't have easy access to anymore. He spoke briefly to Matt's daughter. He tried to connect with others. Matt ended the call thinking, the only person who can sort this out is his father. There was something urgent in Michael's voice, something unresolved, and just days later he was gone. Dr. Conrad Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. He served 2 years. Matt mentioned that they shared a booking agent at one point, and that Murray, even after everything, maintained he'd done nothing wrong. Matt didn't say much more than that, but the weight of that statement kind of speaks for itself. Tito Jackson, Michael's brother, was asked what went through his mind when he first heard the news. His answer was quiet and raw. He said it was the worst thing he'd ever experienced. That other losses, cousins, friends, hadn't prepared him for this. That when his brother died, something inside him just melted. He didn't talk about conspiracies. He didn't go after anyone. He just described what it felt like to lose his younger brother. And then, when asked about Dr. Murray, he said something that honestly stuck with me. He said he'd been raised to forgive. That people sometimes make mistakes without malicious intent. But then, and here's where the quiet became something sharper, he said Dr. Murray knew what he was doing. He was a doctor. He was there to monitor and protect. And instead, he was on the phone with his girlfriend. That's it. No dramatic speech. Just a brother holding two things at once: forgiveness and accountability. Bill closed out his reflections with something that's simple, but that I think cuts right to the heart of everything. When people ask him what killed Michael Jackson, he doesn't point to a single person or a single decision. He says, Michael Jackson left. He says, this world was mean to him. The stress, the manipulation, the financial warfare, the accusations, the loneliness behind all that fame. It all piled up. And Michael, who had given more of himself to the world than almost any entertainer in history, eventually just couldn't carry it anymore. And maybe that's the most honest way to look at it. Not one villain. Not one moment. A slow accumulation of pressure, placed on a person who, for all his extraordinary gifts, was still just a human being trying to sleep at night. Here's what I keep coming back to. The people who were physically closest to Michael, the ones who drove him around, who stood outside his door, who got the frantic late-night phone calls, they all described the same person. Someone generous, someone deeply loving toward children, someone who was also isolated, targeted, exhausted, and surrounded by people who saw him primarily as an asset. The public got one version of Michael Jackson. The world got the moonwalk, the albums, the scandals, the courtroom drama. The people in this story got something different. They got a man who cried in his hotel bathroom over an album, who warned his bodyguard about vultures before they even arrived, who, on one of his last nights alive, was calling people looking for his father. That's the Michael Jackson they knew, and that's the story they've never stopped telling. If any of this made you think differently about what you thought you knew, good, that's the point. The full picture is almost always more complicated than the headlines. And the people who were actually there deserve to be heard. Drop your thoughts below. What stood out to you most? And if you want more deep dives like this one, make sure you're subscribed. There's a lot more where this came from. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.